The soft hum of machinery was Hannah's constant companion in the narrow maintenance tunnels of Nexus 7. She moved quietly through the shadows, her scaled skin catching the dim emergency lights and reflecting them in subtle patterns. Her luminescent eyes, a pale blue that glowed faintly in darkness, scanned the junction ahead before she continued her journey. Nexus 7 was home to thousands, a bustling space station where travelers and residents from across the galaxy mixed and mingled. For everyone except Hannah, she existed on the margins, in the forgotten spaces between walls and beneath floors. "Stay in your sector," Security Chief Tahoe had told her years ago, his hand resting on his weapon. "We don't need your kind causing trouble." Her kind. As if there were others like her. Hannah knew better. She was unique, born of an experiment, then abandoned when her creators decided she was a mistake. Half human, half something else. Something that gave her scaled skin that shifted colors with her emotions and eyes that could see in near total darkness. Today, Hannah needed supplies. Her food stores were running low, and she had learned long ago where to find what she needed without being seen. The recycling depot was her destination, where excess food from the station's restaurants was processed. If she timed it right, she could collect enough to last another week. She crouched at a juncture where the maintenance tunnel met with a public corridor. Through a small vent, she watched the flow of people. Humans in business attire walked alongside tall, willowy Aldarians. A group of short, stocky Minnock traders argued loudly about cargo prices. Two security officers, thankfully not Tahoe, strolled past, barely glancing at the vent where she hid. When the corridor emptied momentarily, Hannah slid the vent cover aside and emerged, pulling the hood of her scavenged jacket low over her face. 20 meters to the utility lift. 15. 10. "Hey, you there?" Hannah froze. A station worker stood at the far end of the corridor, pointing at her. "You're not supposed to be here. This section is for authorized." She didn't wait for him to finish. Hannah spun and ran, her enhanced reflexes giving her speed that surprised the worker. She darted down a side passage and yanked open an access panel that most people didn't know existed. By the time the worker reached the spot, she had disappeared into the walls of the station once more. Her heart raced, but not from exertion. It was the fear, the constant companion that lived with her just as surely as the lonely echo of her footsteps in empty corridors. Back in her sanctuary, a forgotten storage area she converted into living quarters, Hannah slumped against the wall. No supplies today. She would have to try again tomorrow, perhaps during the busier shift change when she might blend in better. Her stomach growled, reminding her why she'd taken the risk in the first place. She glanced around her small home. She had made it as comfortable as possible with items others had discarded: a mattress, some blankets, a small table, and an assortment of containers for storage. One wall was covered with drawings she'd made, images of places she'd seen in station broadcasts, worlds she would never visit. On her makeshift shelf sat her most prized possession, an old datapad she'd repaired. Through it, she accessed the station's information network, her only window to the wider universe. Tonight, as she did most nights, she would read about distant planets and study the sciences and languages that fascinated her. Hannah's hand brushed against the wall, and she felt a faint tremor, something most inhabitants would never notice, but her enhanced senses detected easily. The station was aging. Maintenance was falling behind. She had reported such issues anonymously through public terminals, using the knowledge she'd gained from years of living within the station's infrastructure. No one ever knew their mysterious informant was the monster they feared. As she settled on her mattress with the datapad, Hannah pulled up the station's community forum. She never commented, but reading the conversations helped her feel less alone. Today's top discussion: sightings of the scaled ghost in Sector 7. "I saw it yesterday," wrote one user named Kimji. "Glowing eyes in the dark. I reported it to security, but they said it was probably just a maintenance droid." "My friend in security says it's some kind of hybrid creature," another replied. "They've been trying to catch it for years." "Whatever it is," a third added, Stay away from it. My cousin said it attacked someone last year. Hannah closed her eyes. There had been no attack. A drunk passenger had fallen, and she had dragged him to a more visible area where others found him. She'd left before they arrived, but somehow in the telling and retelling, she had become the cause of his injuries rather than his rescuer. The words stung, but she had grown accustomed to the lies. What hurt more was the loneliness. Watching families embrace at arrivals, friends laughing over meals, couples walking hand in hand. Simple connections that seemed impossible for her. That night, as the station's light cycle dimmed to simulate evening, Hannah climbed through the access tunnels to one of her favorite observation spots. Through a small maintenance port, she could see into the station's central garden. Plants from dozens of worlds grew here, tended carefully to provide both beauty and fresh oxygen. A young family wandered the garden paths below her. A small child pointed excitedly at a flowering plant, and the parents knelt to explain something about it. Hannah watched, imagining what it might be like to walk openly among them, to touch the plants herself, to speak with others without fear. The scaled skin on her hands shifted to a deep blue, the color of her sadness. Yet she continued to watch, continued to hope. Someday, perhaps, things would change. Until then, she would survive as she always had, in the shadows, but never quite surrendering to the darkness. Dr. June tapped the screen of his scanner, frowning at the readings. For the third time this week, unusual energy patterns had appeared in the maintenance sectors of Nexus 7. As the station's lead xenobiologist, anything out of the ordinary fell to him to investigate, especially when it might involve non-human biology. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, adjusting the settings. The energy signature didn't match any known species in the database. It showed characteristics of both organic and synthetic patterns, pulsing in a rhythm that almost seemed alive. The maintenance corridors were eerily quiet as June made his way deeper into the restricted area. His security clearance badge had gotten him past the initial checkpoints, but now he was in zones that rarely saw visitors. The walls here were bare metal, pipes and conduits exposed, a stark contrast to the polished public areas of the station. June paused, checking his scanner again. The signal was stronger now, coming from somewhere ahead. He turned a corner and found himself facing a heavy service door. According to the station schematics on his tablet, this led to an old storage section that hadn't been used in years. "Hello," he called out, feeling slightly foolish. Of course, no one answered. He pressed his hand against the access panel, and the door slid open with a reluctant groan. The air inside was surprisingly clean for an abandoned section. June stepped forward, sweeping his light across the room. The beam caught something, a flash of movement in the far corner. Before he could investigate, a piercing alarm sounded, making him jump. "Emergency lockdown initiated in Sector 12B. All personnel evacuate immediately," announced the station's automated system. June turned to leave, but the door had already sealed shut. He pressed his badge against the access panel, but nothing happened. The lockdown had overridden his clearance. "Security override. June, Dr. Minot. Xenobiology Department," he said clearly, hoping the voice recognition would work. The panel remained red. That's when he felt the first tremor. The floor shook beneath his feet, and a loud crack sounded overhead. He looked up just as a section of ceiling collapsed. Pain exploded through his body as something heavy struck his leg, pinning him to the floor. When the dust settled, June found himself trapped under a fallen support beam. His leg was caught, and a warm wetness told him he was bleeding. His communication device had been crushed in the fall, and his emergency beacon was out of reach in his pocket. "Help," he shouted, but he knew it was futile. This section was isolated, and the lockdown meant no one would be searching here anytime soon. Hours passed. The pain in June's leg grew worse, and he felt lightheaded from blood loss. The emergency lights had dimmed to conserve power, leaving him in near darkness. He was drifting in and out of consciousness when he heard it, a soft scraping sound from somewhere in the shadows. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice weaker than he intended. Silence. Then more scraping, closer now. June squinted into the darkness, and his heart nearly stopped. A pair of luminescent blue eyes watched him from the shadows. "Please," he whispered. "I need help." The eyes blinked, and then a figure moved forward hesitantly. In the dim light, June could make out a humanoid shape. As it came closer, he saw what appeared to be a young woman, but unlike any he had ever seen. Her skin was covered in fine scales that shifted color slightly as she moved. Those luminescent eyes studied him with equal parts curiosity and wariness. "You're hurt," she said, her voice soft and slightly raspy, as if from disuse. June nodded, trying to remain calm despite his shock. This was what his scanner had detected, not an energy pattern, but a living being with unusual biological traits, a hybrid of some kind. "My name is June. I'm trapped," he said, gesturing to the beam across his leg. "Can you help me?" She approached cautiously, staying just out of reach. "Why were you here?" "This is my place. I was following unusual energy readings," he admitted. "I think they were coming from you." The scaled woman tensed, stepping back. "You were hunting me." No, I'm a scientist, a xenobiologist. I study life forms from different worlds. I was curious, not hunting." June winced as pain shot through his leg. "Please, I'll bleed out if I don't get help soon." She seemed to consider this, her head tilted slightly. Then she moved forward and examined the beam pinning him down. "I can lift this," she said, "but you must promise not to tell anyone about me." "I promise," June said quickly, though his scientific mind was racing with questions about who and what she was. To his amazement, she positioned herself beside the beam and lifted it with strength that seemed impossible for her size. June pulled his injured leg free, gasping at the pain. "Thank you," he breathed. "You're incredibly strong." "One of my many differences," she replied, letting the beam down gently. "You need medical attention." Jung tried to stand but collapsed immediately. "I can't walk." After a moment's hesitation, she knelt beside him. "I can help with that too." From a hidden pocket in her worn clothing, she produced a small container. Inside was a thick, translucent gel that she applied to his wound. Almost immediately, the pain began to subside. "What is that?" he asked, amazed. "Something I make," she said simply. "It will stop the bleeding and fight infection." "You created a medical gel." Jung couldn't hide his surprise. "Who are you?" She sat back on her heels, studying him. For the first time, he saw her features clearly, not monstrous as some station rumors claimed, but strangely beautiful in their uniqueness. "My name is Hannah," she finally said, "and I'd lived in these walls for most of my life. By choice." A bitter smile crossed her face. "Would you choose to live among those who call you monster?" June had no answer for that. Instead, he asked, "How will we get out?" "The station is in lockdown." "Lockdowns never keep me contained," Hannah replied. She stood and offered her hand. "Can you stand with help? I know ways out that no one else does." June looked at her outstretched hand, at the scales that shifted with subtle iridescence. Despite everything he'd heard about the creature in the maintenance sectors, he found himself reaching up without hesitation. Their hands touched, and in that moment, something changed. Not just for June, but for Hannah too, whose eyes widened slightly at the casual contact, perhaps the first touch freely offered in a very long time. 3 days had passed since Hannah rescued June from the collapsed maintenance sector. She had helped him back to his private lab rather than the medical bay, understanding his promise to keep her existence secret. His leg was healing well thanks to her mysterious gel, which he had been studying with growing amazement. "Your healing compound contains elements I'd never seen combined before," Jun said, looking up from his microscope. "The molecular structure is extraordinary." Hannah sat across from him on a stool, her luminescent eyes watching him work. She still seemed ready to flee at any moment, but each hour she stayed grew longer than the last. I made it from plants in the station's agricultural section and minerals I found in the maintenance tunnels, she explained. I had to try many combinations before finding one that worked. You did this without lab equipment? Jun asked, unable to hide his astonishment. Hannah's scales shifted slightly, taking on a faint purple hue that Jun was beginning to recognize as embarrassment. I watched the scientists through the vents. I learned. Jun shook his head in wonder. You're remarkable, Hannah. Those words seemed to surprise her. She looked down at her hands, the scales there shimmering in the lab's bright light. May I? Jun asked gently, gesturing to her arm. I'd like to take a small tissue sample. It won't hurt, I promise. Hannah hesitated, then slowly extended her arm. Jun worked carefully, using a painless collection tool. He noticed how she watched every movement with intense curiosity. Have you always had scales? He asked as he prepared the sample. No, Hannah replied quietly. They began growing when I was young. Each year, more of my skin changed. Jun placed the sample under his scanner and watched as the analysis began. The results made his eyes widen. Hannah, your DNA. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. You have human sequences, but there are other patterns integrated throughout. They appear to be adaptive, changing and evolving. Is that bad? She asked, a hint of fear in her voice. Not bad, Jun said quickly. Just extraordinary. Your cells can modify themselves to respond to environmental changes. That explains your strength, your healing abilities, even your luminescent eyes. He turned to face her directly. Hannah, do you know where you came from? Who your parents were? She was quiet for a long moment. I remember very little from before the station. There was a lab. People in white coats. They called me Subject 7. Jun's expression darkened. They experimented on you. Hannah nodded slowly. They were creating something. I heard them talk about adaptive humanoids and survival in extreme environments. There was an accident. Alarms. Fire. I was small, but I remember running. Eventually, I found myself here. Jun typed rapidly on his tablet, searching through classified research databases he had access to. Finally, he stopped on a file labeled Project Adaptation. Terminated. Listen to this, he said. Project terminated following containment breach. Subject 7 unrecovered. Project deemed too dangerous to continue. He looked up at Hannah. This was 15 years ago. The project was a joint venture between corporations seeking to create humans who could survive on harsh planets without expensive equipment. They made me to be a tool, Hannah said softly. They tried, Jun corrected, but you became so much more. He turned his screen to show her the genetic analysis. Your DNA continues to adapt and evolve. You're not just surviving, Hannah. You're thriving in your own way. She stared at the screen, seeing the complex patterns of her own genetic code for the first time. Is this why people fear me? Because I'm different. People fear what they don't understand, Jun replied. And you, Hannah, are truly unique. A small smile touched her lips, perhaps the first genuine smile she had given in years. No one has ever wanted to understand me before. The next day, Jun set up more equipment in his lab. Hannah watched with interest as he arranged sensors around a small area. What is this for? She asked. I'd like to measure your abilities, Jun explained. With your permission. The strength you showed when lifting that beam was remarkable. I'd like to understand how your body achieves that. Hannah nodded, stepping into the sensor array. Over the next few hours, Jun recorded data as she demonstrated her abilities, lifting weights that should have been impossible for someone her size, moving with incredible speed, and even showing how her skin could slightly alter its coloration to match surroundings. Your body temperature changes too, Jun noted, looking at the thermal readings. You can regulate it consciously. Hannah nodded. It helps in the colder sections of the station. As the tests continued, Jun noticed something else. Hannah was enjoying herself. The fear that had been constant in her eyes was fading, replaced by curiosity and even excitement as she discovered aspects of her own abilities she hadn't fully understood. Your cellular structure can actually absorb certain types of energy, Jun said, reviewing the data. That's probably why my scanner detected you. You're not just reflecting energy, you're processing it. Later, as they sat reviewing the results, Jun noticed Hannah staring at a photograph on his desk. That's Nexus 5, he explained. The station where I worked before coming here. It orbits a gas giant with the most beautiful rings. I've only seen pictures of planets, Hannah said softly. In the education broadcasts. Jun was quiet for a moment, struck by the tragedy of her situation. A being designed for adaptation to new worlds, yet trapped in the metal confines of a space station. You should be able to see them, he said finally. Real planets, stars, all of it. Hannah looked up at him, surprised. How? No one would allow me on a transport. Jun considered this. I don't know yet, but there has to be a way. That evening, as Jun was reviewing the day's data, he happened to brush against Hannah's arm as they both reached for the same tablet. He noticed how she froze at the contact. I'm sorry, he said quickly. No, Hannah replied, her scales shifting to that now familiar purple hue. It's just, people don't usually touch me. Not willingly. Jun looked at her thoughtfully, then slowly extended his hand, palm up. May I? Hesitantly, Hannah placed her scaled hand in his. Jun examined it carefully, noting how the scales were smooth and warm, arranged in an intricate pattern that flowed naturally with the contours of her hand. Your scales are beautiful, he said simply. Hannah's eyes widened at the word. Beautiful. No one had ever used that word to describe any part of her. The patterns shift with your emotions, Jun continued, gently turning her hand to see how the scales caught the light. Right now, they're showing a pattern I haven't seen before. What does it look like? She asked quietly. Jun smiled, like starlight reflecting on water. In that moment of connection, as human fingers gently traced the patterns on scaled skin without fear or revulsion, something changed between them. Not just scientific curiosity, but understanding. A bridge formed between two very different beings. Hannah looked at their joined hands, then up at Jun's face. For the first time since she could remember, she didn't feel like a monster or an experiment. She felt seen. The first warning came as a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through the entire station. Jun looked up from his research notes, meeting Hannah's luminescent eyes across the lab. Did you feel that? He asked. Hannah nodded, her scales shifting to an anxious amber color. Something's wrong with the core systems. I felt small vibrations for weeks, but nothing like this. The station's alert system crackled to life. Attention all personnel. We are experiencing technical difficulties with the main reactor cooling system. Please remain calm and await further instructions. Jun's communication device buzzed with an incoming message. It was marked urgent and addressed to all senior scientific staff. He opened it quickly, his expression growing serious as he read. The coolant system for the main reactor is failing, he told Hannah, if they can't stabilize it soon. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what a reactor breach on a space station meant. Within an hour, the situation had deteriorated rapidly. The station's public areas were filled with frightened people as Security Chief Tejo announced emergency evacuation procedures. But Nexus 7 housed over 10,000 residents and visitors, while the emergency shuttles could only transport a fraction of that number. Most of these people will die, Hannah said quietly, watching the scenes unfold on Jun's monitor. Her scales had darkened to a deep blue of distress. Jun's device buzzed again. This time, it was a direct call from the station director, summoning all department heads to emergency command. I have to go, he told Hannah. Stay here where it's safe. Hannah caught his arm. Jun, I might be able to help. How? He asked. I can feel the systems of this station. Not just through vibrations, it's deeper than that. Sometimes, when I touch certain access points, I can connect with them. June stared at her. What do you mean, connect? It's hard to explain, Hannah said. But I think it has to do with the energy absorption you discovered. I can sense data flows, redirect them sometimes. I've used it to reroute power to my hiding places. You can interface with the station's systems. June asked, astonished. Directly? Hannah nodded. I think I could reach the cooling system controls, even if the normal access is damaged. June made a quick decision. Come with me. They moved quickly through the maintenance tunnels, avoiding the panicked crowds in the main corridors. When they reached the command center, June entered his access code while Hannah waited hidden just outside. Inside, chaos reigned. Station Director Sung stood at the central console, surrounded by department heads and technical staff, all shouting over each other. The manual override is completely fried, the chief engineer was saying. We can't reach the cooling regulators. Even if we could, the radiation levels are already too high for anyone to enter that section. How long do we have? Director Sung asked. 2 hours, maybe less, before catastrophic failure, came the grim reply. June stepped forward. Director, I may have a solution. All eyes turned to him. Dr. June, the director acknowledged. Unless you've suddenly become an expert in reactor physics, I'm not sure. I know someone who can interface directly with the station's systems. June interrupted. Someone who might be able to restore the cooling controls without physically entering the affected area. Security Chief Taeho narrowed his eyes. What are you talking about, Doctor? There's a person aboard with unique abilities, June explained. She has demonstrated the capacity to connect with and manipulate electronic systems through direct biological contact. This is ridiculous, Chief Taeho scoffed. We don't have time for science fiction solutions. She's waiting outside, June pressed. At least let her try. What do we have to lose? Director Sung looked at the reactor readouts, which were growing more unstable by the minute. Bring this person in. June went to the door and motioned for Hannah to enter. As she stepped into the light, several people gasped. Chief Taeho instantly drew his weapon. It's the creature, he shouted. The monster from the maintenance sectors. Lower your weapon, June demanded, stepping between Hannah and the security chief. She's not a monster. Her name is Hannah, and she may be our only hope. Director Sung raised a hand for silence. You expect us to trust the fate of this station to whatever this is. I expect you to consider all options before 10,000 people die, June replied firmly. Hannah stepped forward, her scales shifting nervously but her voice steady. I can help. I need access to a primary system node. Chief Taeho shook his head. This is insane. Director, we can't. A violent shudder ran through the station, cutting him off. The lights flickered, and several systems went offline momentarily. 1 hour until critical failure, the computer announced dispassionately. Director Sung's face hardened with decision. Show us what you can do. They led Hannah to the main systems hub, a room filled with glowing data terminals and pulsing light conduits. She approached the central console hesitantly. I'll need to make direct contact, she explained. It might look strange. Do what you need to do, the director said. Hannah placed both hands on the console. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, her scales began to illuminate. Patterns of light flowed across her skin, matching the rhythms of the data streams in the console. Her luminescent eyes closed in concentration. She's accessing the system, June explained quietly. Her cells can absorb and process electronic data, creating a direct interface. The technicians watched in amazement as displays around the room began to respond to Hannah's silent commands. Diagrams of the reactor appeared, showing the damaged cooling systems. The primary coolant regulators are completely destroyed, Hannah said, her voice distant as if speaking from somewhere else. But there's a secondary system that was deactivated during the last upgrade. I can reroute power and reactivate it. Her fingers moved across the console, not typing but somehow merging with the controls. The scaled patterns on her skin flowed faster, occasionally flashing with intensity as she encountered problems. "The radiation is affecting my connection," she said, strain evident in her voice. "I need to go deeper." Before anyone could ask what she meant, Hannah's entire body began to glow. The scales seemed to open somehow, revealing luminous patterns beneath that pulsed in synchrony with the station's core systems. Security Chief Toho stepped back in alarm, but Jun watched with a mixture of concern and fascination. He had known Hannah was unique, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. Warning alarms suddenly stopped blaring. On the main display, temperature readings for the reactor core began to stabilize. "She's doing it," the chief engineer whispered. For nearly 30 minutes, Hannah remained connected to the system, her body glowing with the effort. Finally, the computer announced, "Reactor cooling systems stabilized. Emergency status downgraded." Hannah's glow faded, and she swayed on her feet. June rushed forward to steady her as her eyes fluttered open. "Did it work?" she asked weakly. "Yes," Jun said, supporting her carefully. "You saved the station, Hannah. You saved everyone." Director Sung approached slowly, wonder and disbelief battling on his face. "How did you do that?" Hannah looked at him with tired eyes. "I spoke to the station," she said simply. And it listened. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. The monster they had feared for years had just saved all their lives. Security Chief Toho holstered his weapon, looking troubled. "All this time, we thought. Maybe it's time to reconsider what we think we know," Jun suggested quietly, still supporting Hannah's exhausted form. As the emergency teams went to work securing the station, Jun helped Hannah to a chair. Her scales had faded to a pale, tired gray, but there was something new in her eyes, a quiet pride that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered to Jun. He smiled and, without hesitation, took her scaled hand in his. "Thank you for proving me right." The grand chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as Hannah approached the central podium. Sunlight streamed through the massive crystal dome overhead, catching on her scales and creating patterns of light that danced across the walls. 3 months had passed since the near disaster on Nexus 7, and in that time, everything had changed. Jun watched from his seat in the front row, pride warming his chest. He remembered how nervous Hannah had been when they first received the Council's invitation. Now, she walked with confidence, her luminescent eyes taking in the assembled representatives from hundreds of worlds without flinching. "Honored Council members," Hannah began, her voice clear and steady. "I stand before you today, not just as myself, but as a symbol of possibility." The Council chairperson, an elderly human named Sora, nodded encouragingly. It had been Sora who had first proposed granting Hannah full citizenship rights after hearing about the Nexus 7 incident. "6 months ago, I lived in darkness, hiding in the walls of a space station," Hannah continued. "I was feared, called a monster, denied the most basic rights. Today, I address the highest governing body in our shared galaxy." June thought back to the days following the reactor crisis. News of Hannah's actions had spread rapidly throughout the station. People who had once crossed to the other side of corridors to avoid her now stopped to thank her. Children who had been told scary stories about the scaled ghost now asked to see her remarkable skin up close. Director Sung had offered her official quarters on the station's residential level and appointed her as special systems consultant. Security Chief Tahoe had personally apologized for years of harassment. But the most significant moment had come when the Galactic News Network had run a feature story titled, "The Savior of Nexus 7, How a Feared Outsider Became a Hero." "My unique biology allowed me to save lives," Hannah was saying to the Council. "But it shouldn't take a crisis for us to recognize the value in our differences." After the network story, messages had begun pouring in from across the galaxy. Other hybrids and genetic variants, many living in hiding like Hannah had, shared their stories. Some had been created by the same corporation that had abandoned Hannah. Others were the results of different experiments or natural mutations. All had faced discrimination and fear. There are others like me, Hannah said, echoing Jun's thoughts. Not identical, each unique in our own way. Some can survive environments that would kill unmodified humans. Others have enhanced senses or abilities that could benefit everyone, if only they were allowed to participate in society. A council member from the Turellian system raised a hand. But how can we be sure these variations are safe? Your creation was deemed too dangerous to continue. Deemed dangerous by whom? Hannah countered gently. By corporations who couldn't control what they created. By people who feared what they didn't understand. She gestured to Jun. Dr. Jun has spent months studying my biology. I invite you to review his findings. Jun smiled at the mention. Their research partnership had quickly become the most fulfilling work of his career. Together, they had mapped Hannah's unique genetic structure and documented her abilities. They had discovered that her capacity to interface with technology wasn't an accident, but an adaptive response. Her body had evolved to communicate with the electronic systems that surrounded her. The data is clear, Hannah continued. Genetic diversity strengthens us all. What you call abnormality, I call adaptation. What you see is strange, I know to be beautiful. That word, beautiful, still brought warmth to Hannah's scales whenever she heard it. The first time Jun had called her scales beautiful, it had changed something fundamental in how she saw herself. Now, standing before the Galactic Council, she used the word with confidence. I propose the establishment of the Adaptive Beings Registry, Hannah said. Not to track or control us, but to acknowledge our existence and provide protection under galactic law. To create opportunities for those who have lived too long in shadows. The council chamber buzzed with discussion. Not everyone agreed. Change never came easily, but the majority seemed receptive. Chairperson Sora stood. The council will consider your proposal carefully, Citizen Hannah. Your courage in coming forward is noted and appreciated. Citizen Hannah. The title was still new, still precious. The official citizenship ceremony had been held on Nexus 7, with the entire station watching. Hannah had received not just basic rights, but full recognition as a person under galactic law. As the session concluded, Jun met Hannah at the chamber doors. That was perfect, he told her. You had them listening to every word. Do you think it will make a difference? She asked, her scales shifting to a hopeful green gold. It already has, he replied, pointing to a small group approaching them. 3 beings stood there, each with visible differences from standard humans. One had skin that seemed to shimmer like metal. Another had elongated fingers that branched at the tips. The third had eyes that swirled with changing colors. We heard your speech, said the one with metallic skin. We've been hiding for years. When we saw your story on the news networks, you gave us hope, finished the one with the swirling eyes. Hannah reached out, taking their hands in her scaled ones without hesitation. You're not alone anymore, she said simply. Later that evening, Hannah and Jun stood on the observation deck of their transport ship, looking out at the stars. Their next destination was a research facility on Meridian Prime, where they would continue their work studying adaptive genetics. Already, medical applications of Hannah's unique biology were showing promise in treating conditions once thought incurable. Did you ever imagine this? Jun asked, gesturing to the vastness of space before them. When you were hiding in the walls of Nexus 7, Hannah shook her head, her luminescent eyes reflecting the starlight. I dreamed of seeing real planets someday. But this... She looked down at the small badge on her tunic, the official emblem of a galactic citizen. This was beyond dreaming. Jun smiled. And it's just the beginning. On his tablet, messages continued to arrive from all corners of the galaxy. Scientists offering research partnerships. Government officials proposing policy changes. Most importantly, messages from others like Hannah, emerging from hiding, inspired by her story. The scales on Hannah's hand shifted to that now familiar pattern. the one June had once described as starlight on water. It appeared whenever she felt truly happy. "From monster to savior," she said softly. "You were never a monster," June replied, taking her hand. "The only monster was fear." As their ship accelerated toward their next destination, stories about the savior of Nexus 7 continued to spread across the galactic network. In hidden places throughout the stars, others who had been called monsters began to hope that they too might someday step into the light. And aboard one ordinary transport ship, a woman with scaled skin and luminescent eyes stood beside the man who had first seen her true nature, both of them gazing toward a future neither could have imagined just months before, a future where difference was not just accepted, but celebrated.